Good afternoon, everyone. I am going to go ahead and get started because it is 3 p.m. and we want to make sure that we get going with this and give everyone their time for today. So welcome to our training. It is being recorded, so if you miss any part, feel free to reach out and we'll get that recording to you. Also, feel free to drop questions in the chat. We will keep an eye on that as we go through the training, but also feel free to come off of mute and ask questions. You are here for the preparing for file review training because you're part of the 25-26 cohort. As we go through, I would also like to say, please feel free to stop us if we start going too fast or if you need anything repeated or anything like that. We're very flexible when it comes to those things. So feel free to interrupt us. This is our team. My name is Carly Thibodeau, and I have been with the team for about 3 years. And before that, I was a teacher for 21 years. And with me today, we have Jennifer.
Good afternoon. I am Jennifer Gleason, and like the rest of the team, I was a special education teacher before I joined the team 4 years ago.
And Ashley is with us.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ashley Satry, and I was also a special education teacher before joining the team about 2 years ago. Thanks for joining us on this hot day. Hopefully your spaces are cool.
Yes. And Julie.
Hi, I'm Julie Pelletier. I'm the admin support for the monitoring team. I'm in my 8th year with the DOE, and prior to that, I was admin support at a K-5 elementary school for 16 years.
Awesome. Thank you. And Colette Sullivan is our federal programs coordinator. Our email is listed here. This is the best way to get in touch with us. If any questions come up or you want some feedback around things, feel free to reach out to us. All right, our agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about compliance versus best practice. Then we're going to jump into those expectations around the self-assessment, which will also be what we're looking at for when we come on site for the file review. And we'll talk about other considerations, timelines, and like I said, we'll go over any questions as they come up.
Can I interrupt for a second? There are some folks from my team that cannot get in to the link. And I was waiting for a very long time as well, and I finally was able to get in. So is there a way of sending a new link to them?
Who is it, Lena?
My entire team, Dan Bernardini, Jen Scribner, Julie King, Jen Guyton. If you gave me the link, I could send it to them.
Julie's here. Jenny's here.
Okay.
Let me see.
It's possible they all got in the same time as me, but I was in the waiting room a long time.
Okay, that's interesting. I think there's a lag in time before you're showing up for me.
Okay.
So let's see. I don't see Dan. You can share your link that you used, and we'll just have them change their screen name when they get here.
Okay.
Yeah, I think one of my peeps is here, Amy Miller, but it says her name, so that's why there's two Amy Braggs showing.
Okay, so Amy, if one of you could just, if the non-Amy could just click on the dots in the upper right corner of their Zoom screen and rename themselves, that would be great.
I was already on it. I just finished. Thanks.
Great.
Okay. All right. So yes, welcome. You are part of the 25-26 cohort for audit and review as part of our general supervision system. And this is outlined in IDEA and MUSER. We are tasked with looking at those special ed forms and other things and making sure that they follow regulations as they are outlined in IDEA. And we report this to the Office of Special Ed Programming. And so you can find that information here. There's a link at the bottom if you can see it that will take you to IDEA. It's also outlined in MUSER, the Maine Unified Special Ed Regulations, because that encompasses IDEA and the Maine regulations that go above and beyond IDEA. And then just a bit about compliance versus best practice. We've been having this conversation for a little while now. We have many roles as part of this position that we're in, and our main role is to review that special ed paperwork, forms, files, IEPs, those things for compliance as it relates to the regulations of IDEA and MUSER. However, we also do that support thing where we offer professional development and training, just like we are doing here today. And so when we're doing our trainings and PD, we really try to include the best practice pieces because that's what we want for all students. And that's really leading to the better programming, and it's just better for the students. However, when we're talking about reviewing paperwork and part of the audit process, we are sticking to compliance and really trying to make that as clear as possible. So yeah, this is an example of that compliance versus best practice piece. So when we come on site, if there was a note about a parent choosing to waive their right to 7-day notice before implementing the IEP, we would be looking for that documented in the written notice, and that's all we need to see for compliance. However, best practice would be to document that in the written notice and then also use that optional form that's available. That would be both, either way would be correct, and obviously compliance is the minimum, and then you could go above and beyond for that best practice piece. And this comes into play sometimes when you're thinking about litigation, due process things of that nature. Then here is a sample of our CAP worksheet, corrective action plan. So this is what you would get at once we've kind of come on site, done our review and taken a look at everything. And so today we're going to focus on these findings in the left-hand column. Those are our code. You don't need to know what they are or memorize them, but we reference them all the time, and they will be throughout this training. And when you do the self-assessment and when we talk about it, we often refer to these codes. So we're going to go through each of these and talk about where that is in the IEP and what those look like for compliance and or best practice. So the document that we like to share is our IEP quick reference document. We have updated it for the 25-26 cohort. There have been minimal changes. We did add that very top one, the WRN2, and we'll get into that as we go. But this link, that blue underlined IEP quick reference document, will take you to this document so you have it available. You can see that the codes are listed and it's embedded within the IEP, and anything in red is needed for compliance. And then we also highlight anything that's best practice in blue. Okay, and now we're going to take a look at those items that you'll see on the self-assessment, which will be the same things that we're looking at when we come for the on-site review. And I'm turning it over to Ashley.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so as Carly said, these are the findings that you'll see on the self-assessment. They are generally in the order that they pop up on the self-assessment. And so we will go through each one. And like Carly said, if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat or pause me and feel free to jump in and ask any questions you guys have. So we're going to just jump right into the findings. So FOT7, this is in section 1. This is that the IEP has been sent to the parent within 21 school days. And for compliance, these little bullets will actually pop right up on the self-assessment for you so that you can, score yourself where you're falling. So that's why we have this little blurb here. Yes, the IEP was sent to the parent within 21 school days of the annual meeting, or no, it wasn't, or it was blank. Those would be non-compliant. So this is where we look for that on the IEP. So we just look at the date of the annual IEP meeting, And then we look at the date the IEP was sent to the parent and make sure that was within 21 school days. When we come on site, we may need to ask for a calendar that has your snow days or anything like that marked off, just to ensure that that's 21 school days. The next finding is FOT 8. This is also within section 1, and this is that the next annual meeting was held within 364 days of the annual meeting. So yes for compliance would be that it was held within that timeline. No would be that it was held outside of that timeline. So again, we look for that in section 1. We just look at the date of the annual IEP meeting, and then we look down at the date of the next annual IEP meeting and make sure that that is within that 364 days. Okay, and then moving right along in the IEP to section 3, this finding is for CIM1. This is that consideration of special factors. I kind of think of that as the table of contents for the IEP. Yes for compliance is that each of those questions is answered, so there are no blanks, excuse me, and that if something is marked yes, there is alignment within the IEP for that special factor, and no would be if there was a blank or there was some sort of missing compliance piece. So we'll look at that section 3. Here we go. This is section 3 of the IEP. Again, looking to make sure that each of these boxes is checked, or each of these options is checked either yes, no, or NA, and there are no blanks, and that if there is something marked yes, there is something within the IEP to align to that. So an example being, if academic needs is checked yes, we would look forward to make sure that there's either an academic goal or some sort of academic support there in accommodations, services, etc. All right, moving right along to section 4A of the IEP. This is for finding RAE 1, and this is the results of the initial or the most recent evaluations of the child. So for compliance here, yes is going to be that the most recent evaluations are documented, that the current evaluations, if they go beyond that 3-year triennial period, it's documented in the written notice, and that the evaluations support the disability category, and also that it is dated, the evaluations are dated and named. So here are the things that should be included in section 4A. You're going to want to have any of the academic and functional or developmental evaluations that are used in those eligibility decisions, any relevant state or district assessments. You can include transition assessments here from your transition plan 9B. You can also include those here if you want to, not necessary, but you can. We like it when you do see them there. Any other relevant assessments. And again, there's that little bullet about any evals that are beyond that 3-year date. We would then just look back to make sure that that is documented within the written notice. And just those clerical things of making sure that the evaluation name is there, the date of the evaluation, and any of those scores are there. For our little call out bullet, something we do see in the field sometimes is that when a disability category is identified really young, that evaluative information is sometimes left off of section 4A. So in this example, for a student who was diagnosed with autism very young and identified under the disability category of autism, we would see that that maybe got left off of this section 4A. And so just pull that forward and make sure that it's there. And in that case, we wouldn't be worried about that date as much if it's an older evaluation, but just make sure that doesn't fall off there. Okay, now we are moving to section 4B of the IEP. This is the academic, functional, and developmental strengths of the student. For compliance, it is compliant if there are strengths listed in this strengths or relative strengths listed, non-compliant if there's nothing included there. And when considering those strengths, of course, for academic, you're going to look at reading, writing, listening, speaking, and math. And then for those functional developmental areas, you're going to want to think about those cognitive, communicative, motor, adaptive, social, emotional, and sensory needs. and make sure that they're, like, again, this cannot be blank. There need to be strengths here. They should be based on evaluations and observations, but they should not be a restatement of that evaluative information. It should really be, what does that strength look like in the classroom for that student? So just making sure you're including strengths and or relative strengths for the student. Okay, APG2 section 4C of the IEP. This is your academic gaps or skill deficits. As for compliance here, what we're looking for is that if there are academic gaps listed, it would be non-compliant if there are no academic gaps noted and the student has academic needs. And so that's yes or no for that. In section 4C, we're looking for two things, though. We're looking for those academic skill gaps and the how statement. There we go. So you also have to have a how statement or how those academic gaps are impacting the students' access to the gen ed curriculum. So making sure that the how statement is there, that would be yes, that would be compliant as long as that how statement is there. And if the how statement is missing, that would be non-compliant. And again, that's for a student who does have academic needs. So that does not need to be there if the student doesn't have academic needs. So here is a little bit more information about that box C. Again, we're looking for 4C, looking for two parts here. We're looking for those identified, distinctly measurable and persistent skill gaps. We love to see that in a bulleted list if there are more than one, which there usually are. And then that how statement for how those skill gaps have an adverse impact on the child accessing the gen ed curriculum. Here's an example of what that could look like. This student has a gap for reading comprehension, and for the how statement, this deficit impacts her ability to comprehend grade level text across content areas within the gen ed curriculum. And again, we have one more finding. 4C is a tricky one. There's 3 findings within that one box of 4C. We also look for alignment. So any gaps that are listed in section 4C have to be aligned to a goal. So for this to be compliant, this is why we love a bulleted list. Whatever those skill gaps are that are listed, we'll be checking to make sure that there are goals that are aligned to those skill gaps. And this would be non-compliant if there are gaps listed that don't have goals. So just a little basic visual here to remember that every skill gap that you identify should have a goal that is aligned to it.
Can I jump in for a question now?
Sure, please do, Lena.
Perfect. So we have a number of students who come to us with behavioral issues and obviously, or emotional regulation, anxiety, depression, right? And so we immediately offer them therapy, right? Because we feel as though that they need this. And initially they'll take it because they know it's the right thing to do. But then the student doesn't show up, and it's this battle of us calling the parent saying, please have your son or daughter show up. And then eventually the parent just says, we're revoking this service because it's too much of a hassle for us. And so clearly the student still has that gap. And then we will write a goal where we're trying to address that from, a SDI session or whatever it might be. But sometimes sometimes it doesn't have the impact of a goal. Like it's more of like the student needs a check-in, like frequent check-ins with a trusted adult to monitor emotional regulation. Would that be an acceptable thing to do to address something in that front page? And if yes, would it fall under a classroom accommodation or would it fall under a supplemental aid or service?
That's a great question, Lena. So my first reaction to that is that if it is identified as a gap, in that 4C or 4D, if you're talking about emotional regulation or whatever, a functional gap, it would have to have a goal aligned to it. So if it's not going to be something that's driven by a goal, for the example that you gave, I would say that would be appropriate as an accommodation in section 6, and you could put that in the written notice to clarify that. And I see my team members nodding, but they're more than welcome to jump
Okay.
in too.
So just to clarify, we would put in the written notice, MIVA team members, suggest the student have services, however, these have been revoked. It does not warrant a specific goal, however, we're gonna offer a so would you say it was a supplemental aid or a classroom accommodation?
Yeah, that would be an IEP team decision on that.
Either,
Both of
either one
those
or
would
the other, it
be-
doesn't
yep,
matter.
Yep,
Okay.
and those would both be just listed in section C in the same way, yeah.
Okay, so but we should not post, so what I've been doing is putting it in the front page and then in parentheses saying this deficit will be serviced via a supplemental service or classroom accommodation.
Yeah, I would say not to do that, yep, because just generally, I feel like maybe when we were on site, we could have that discussion of, okay, you know, you're explaining how this is going, but best practice, just don't put it in 4C, 4D, because we're forced by IDEA to look for that alignment there, so.
So my follow-up question to that is that a revisionable thing? Can we revise the IEP at this point, or do we need to have a meeting to make that amendment?
I'm gonna defer to Jennifer or Carly on that one.
I would, if you're changing services, you need to have a meeting.
We're not changing services, right? It's just that we put it in the language in the front page of the IEP, but we're still offering the same thing. You don't want it in that section. So is it something we can just revise and take it out because it doesn't change the substance of what we're offering?
You could probably do an amendment without a meeting, but you still have to write a written notice and talk to the parent.
So an amendment, not a revision. Okay.
Thanks, Lena. We always can count on you for like the best, like actual examples of what's really happening in the field. So we appreciate
Oh,
it.
thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so just as far as alignment goes, here's a little visual of what it actually looks like on the IEP. So here's 4C. You can see that there are 2 skill gaps identified. They're in a lovely bulleted list. So it makes it very clear what the skill gaps are and how many there are. You can see there's a how statement there. And then you can see that there are 2 goals to align to each of those gaps. So a gap for addition with regrouping, and a goal for addition with regrouping, and a gap for single digit subtraction, and a goal for single digit subtraction. Now there's bonus points here if anybody notices the error on our goal slides. So there is a non-compliant issue on both of our goals if anybody's feeling like they're ready to identify it. But it's a little small, so we'll give you a hint. Somebody in our last training actually pointed out to us, we don't have citations here. So there are no citations to our own academic goals. So we figured we'd tell on ourselves. But anyway, okay, there's your alignment. And then we're going to talk about the same thing, just in terms of functional. So it's all very similar sounding. FDP2 is the same thing, having those functional or developmental skill gaps listed in section 4D. So compliant would be that the skill gaps are there. Non-compliant would be that there are no skill gaps, but there are needs. And so this is also that 2-part section. So we're going to want those skill gaps and your functional developmental how statement. So again, this is compliant if there is a how statement for each of those gaps. Now, I don't want to get too confusing here, but I just wanted to point out often, because in the functional section, we usually see gaps for OT, for PT, for speech, etc. We often will see that one of those sections does not have a how statement. So just make sure you have a how statement for each area of gap that you have listed here. So hopefully that didn't confuse anything, but I wanted to make that point. So if the how statement is there, it is compliant, and if it's missing, it would be non-compliant. Here's that same visual just to show section 4D, making sure that you have your skill gaps here and your how statements here. And we have a couple of examples or an example. This student has a skill deficit in self-regulation, and this skill deficit impacts his ability to attend to and engage in lessons within the gen ed setting. So that's just a simple, there's your gap, there's your how statement.
And you want it listed just like that, the gap just like that, no explanation.
Yes, we really like less is more, because what we find is when you put too much, not you, Lena, of course, but when there's too much written there, more of a narrative format, often other gaps are identified when explaining the skill gap. So
I do it. That's my problem. I'm a narrative gal, so thank you.
yeah, I was too, to be honest. I always wanted to write as much as I possibly could, but it really, more often than not, we'll see that there's another gap that is, yeah, long-winded, same. I think it comes with the trade, you guys. So anyway, yes, just like that, short and sweet. Alignment. So here we go. What are we looking at here? This is making sure that the skill gaps that were identified in 4D for your functional gaps are aligned to goals. Same thing we already talked about. If there is a gap listed for, and then a goal for every gap, this will be compliant. Here's our little visual of make sure each gap has a goal. And here's an example from the IEP. This one, we have functional skill gaps in following a visual schedule and requesting help. Nice bulleted list. We have a how statement of these gaps affect Sammy's ability to access age-appropriate classroom activities. And then you can see that we have goals for following a visual schedule and requesting help. And I don't think we have any errors in there, but I'm not going to look too closely at that one. So, okay, just about those first couple of sections. Are there any questions that are that you guys want to come off mute and talk about, or I'm checking through the chat. It looks like nothing's in the chat yet. Carly maybe can get that link. Okay, we'll keep moving along, and there will be other chances for questions. We went a little over in our morning session this morning, so you'll notice we're speeding right along. But okay, now we're going to talk about measurability of your goals. So on the self-assessment, before we get into the compliance thing, I just want to do a little explanation of how we look at this. So all of the academic goals will be looked at as a group when putting them into the self-assessment. So there's just one question around, are your academic goals all measurable? So you'll have to look at all of your goals, and that's how we review them as well. We review them as a block. So just make sure you read through all of your goals and then put your answers into your self-assessment around the academic goals. So for compliance, academic goals have to be measurable, and we'll talk about what that specifically looks like. If they're not measurable, they will not be compliant, and we'll go ahead to the next slide for what makes them measurable. So we kind of talk about compliance and best practice here. So for compliance, each goal must be measurable, and that means it must include measurement data. They also cannot reference specific curriculum or standard scores within that measurement. And then finally, if you use a rubric as your measurement, it has to be attached to the IEP. So just keep that in mind when we're coming on site to review and this goes for all instances. If there are any rubrics for your academic goals or your functional goals, the rubrics need to be right with the IEP, and that's to make sure that they're measurable. As far as best practice notes for measurability, you'll get best practice notes from us and after we've come on site, but we're talking about it now. We recommend that you avoid multiple skills within a goal. That just makes them really hard to measure when there's multiple skills in there. Sorry guys, I'm getting tired at the end of the day. Be skill specific. So avoid those outcome-based goals. You really want to make your goals measurable and skill specific so that you can see how they are making progress instead of those overarching outcome goals of like work completion or whatever. Really make it focused on the skill. And then avoid using grade level as measurement. And that is because grade level generally encompasses so many skills. So it's really not skill specific enough to see how the student is progressing. Here's just another example. I was also famous for writing this exact goal when I was writing, I mean, maybe not famous. Lena, I'll come to your question in just a sec. Let me finish this little spiel about specific program data, and then I'll get right to you. This is why we recommend not using that, or say not to use that specific program data. So one, if the student leaves and we'll go from level 3 to level 4 or level F and to level G. Is that the right order? Yeah. If they leave your district and the next district doesn't have that curriculum, they won't be able to show progress on that goal. Also, moving from level to level generally encompasses multiple skills. So in this example, we have fluency and reading comprehension that need to be at a certain rate for level 3. And to get to level 4, fluency and reading comprehension need to be increased. So of course, you can still use those curriculums, just write your goals around the skills themselves and try to make them one skill per goal. So long-winded way of just saying, take the skill out of the curriculum and don't reference the curriculum. Go ahead, Lena. Oh, hold on, you're muted.
Sorry. You may know that because we're virtual, we contract our related services, right? So we don't have the same control, I guess. I guess we should, but I mean, it's harder. It's harder for us to control how goals are written. And we have a couple of speech and language pathologists who choose to write a multi-skill goal, but then they break it into objectives. So each skill is then broken down into objectives. And I've allowed that because then they're measuring each objective separately. Is that something I ought not to allow?
Well, so what I would say about this is it's best practice to not include those multiple skills within a goal. You can if you want to, but the tricky thing here is the annual goal itself has to be measurable without relying on the objectives. So as long as that is the case, it's fine. So just make sure that measurement, or there is measurement in the annual goal that doesn't say like, will achieve this based on the following objectives, because that's not measurable as a standalone goal.
Awesome, thank you.
Yep. Okay, citations. This is for the monitoring team because we forgot our own citations. So SPG 4, this is about each of your academic goals, making sure they have a citation linking them to the Gen Ed curriculum standards. Yes, and again, remember, you'll be scoring these when you do your self-assessment all in a block. So just make sure you're looking at all of your academic goals. Yes, it's compliant if they all have a citation. No, it's not compliant if they either all don't have a citation or some don't have a citation. So as far as citation goes, for basic compliance, each academic goal has to be cited to the standards. We give a couple of best practice guiding notes here that each academic goal should be cited to the grade level standard. And if a student is taking the alternate assessment, those goals should be cited to the alternate academic achievement standards. And so we've linked those here in our PowerPoint. They're also on the DOE website, or that's where that link will take you. And there's a webinar about the alternate academic achievement standards at that YouTube link, in case you're somebody who's working with kids who are taking the alternate assessment and you need to know a little bit more about that. We give this one example of how to cite the standards. It does not have to look exactly like this. We have seen them in the middle of the goal. We've seen them at the end. We've seen them in the title. There just has to be a citation to the standards here. And we give this recommendation of how to cite the MLR using the strand, the grade span, and the standard number. But again, if you guys have a different format that works for your teams and it makes sense to you and your IEP teams, that's fine. You do not necessarily have to use the MLR. If you're using the Common Core or another district adopted standard, that's fine. We just give this one example of how to use the MLRs because they were a little tricky to figure out how to cite those. So if you have any questions about that too, you can always feel free to reach out. Okay, one more alignment piece. So this is alignment looking forward from your academic goals to Section 7. So for this to be compliant, all of the academic goals need to be addressed through a service in Section 7. So what we look for generally, or at least what I look for, is the given statement in your academic goal to say, given specially designed instruction, or given consultation, or whatever the service is in writing or math or whatever it is in your goal. We then look to the service grid to make sure that it is aligned to the service grid and that each academic goal is being addressed by a service. So that would be compliant. And if they are not linked to the service grid, then it would be non-compliant. Here is an example. So I've had to memorize this slide a little bit because I can't at all tell what those goals say. It's just small print, but so this is for Sammy. Sammy has 3 academic goals for writing. So Sammy is getting specially designed instruction in writing. And you can see that on the Section 7 service grid that there is specially designed instruction in writing. And so that is what we're looking for that alignment piece. All right. Now we are going to talk about measurability of your functional goals. So this is going to sound very similar, but this is around the functional piece. And one note about the self-assessment. So in the same way that we look at all of the academic goals as a chunk when putting it into the self-assessment or EMT on our end, the functional goals are grouped by service provider. So when you're doing your self-assessment, look at all of your speech goals together and you're going to put them in under your speech language provider and score them on the self-assessment as a block. Excuse me. And the same with your PT or your behavior or your special ed teacher. Excuse me. I think the wildfire smoke is getting me today. Sorry, you guys. So just a little tip about when you're putting that into the self-assessment, that's what we're looking for there. It's a little confusing. Carly, I might have to tag you in for a second.
And I'm not understanding, what you're saying here. So
if you have speech and language goals, and there are 3 speech and language goals, do not look at the 3 separately, look at them together. So you're just going to look at the speech and language and go, are they measurable? And if they're measurable
per student,
right, per
yeah,
student.
okay.
Yep. So every IEP you look at, depending on what they have for service provider, related service providers, then you'll put in what that related service provider is, and then you just look at their goals together as one.
Thank you. I understand now. I thought you meant clumping them all together, and that didn't make sense.
Right. No,
Sorry.
it's per
Per student.
speech language,
Okay.
OT,
Yep.
PT,
Yep.
that
Gotcha.
kind of thing. Yep. So this is going to look really familiar. Also, measurable functional goals. Compliance is that they must be measurable, including measurement data. They can't reference that specific curriculum or standard scores from evaluations. And if a rubric is used as measurement, it must be attached to the IEP. Best practice, again, is to avoid those multiple skills, be specific or skill specific in your goals, and avoid using grade level as measurement. So very similar to academic. And then here is an example of a measurable functional goal. You have your baseline data, that's the present level. And then in the goal, they're working to go from 1 out of 5 opportunities being able to use a tool from her toolkit to 4 out of 5 opportunities. So it's measurable and it is focused on one skill. This is another alignment piece, because just like we look at alignment from the academic goals to the service grid, we look at alignment from the functional goals to the service grid. So here we're looking to make sure that if you have a goal that says given speech and language services, we would be looking for speech and language on the service grid. Given OT services, there would be OT on the service grid, and so on. Because every goal needs a service. And then also keep in mind that every service on the service grid needs to have a goal. So here's an example of Sammy again, and Sammy has specially designed instruction around executive functioning for a functional goal. And so that is identified on the service grid. And then the second goal is also around specially designed instruction for executive functioning. However, it also includes BCBA consultation. So that second goal actually has 2 services within that goal. So you can see that they're both outlined here on the service grid under that SDI executive functioning and the BCBA consultation. So whatever's listed in those goals needs to be on the service grid. Any questions? Okay, we're going to keep plugging away. SAS 1, Section 6, this is the section accommodations, modifications, statement of supplementary aid services, modifications or supports to be provided. So we're really looking that this is complete. So if you put something in the left-hand column, it's complete across the row. So you're not leaving any blank boxes. If there are blank boxes across the row, then we would mark that as non-compliant. So we don't necessarily look to see like what those accommodations are, but just if something is listed in the left-hand column, make sure to check off those check boxes of where, when they can access those, like in the classroom, during assessments, and so on. And then the location, that special ed or general ed, the frequency that they'll be accessing those, and then the duration. And then we just put a little note here because this comes up sometimes about consultation when we start talking about services. And if there's a consult service on the service grid, but then we find no goal aligned to it, sometimes people will say, well, we're not really working on a goal. I just want to check in with the teacher and make sure that they're doing all right. So if that's the case and there is no goal to go with the consult, then it may be more appropriate to list in section 6 as a collaboration between that person and whoever they're collaborating with. So in this example, it's the OT collaborating with the regular ed teacher. And that's just an example. But like I said, if there's no goal, but they still want to document that they're checking in, then this may be appropriate. Alt 1 is also in section 6. Once you get below the grid, it's all about the alternate assessment. So here we're looking for compliance is that if the student is taking the alternate assessment, you've checked yes, that there is an explanation of why the child can't participate in that gen ed assessment. So here's that example. The team has decided that yes, they're going to participate in the alternate assessment. So it's checked yes. And there's the explanation. So that would be compliant. So if it's yes, you have to have the explanation. Otherwise, check no or NA. That is an IEP team decision, whichever box you check, if it's no or NA. Then if you check yes, that they're taking the alternate assessment, we also go back and look at academic goals to make sure that each academic goal or all of the academic goals have short-term objectives with them. And the goals should be linked to those alternate academic achievement standards. So here's an example of a student that's taking the alternate assessment. They have a goal, but then they have short-term objectives also. They must have those short-term objectives for their academic goals. SVC2, this is about the service grid, section 7, and these are the services being provided. So again, very similar to the section 6, if you put something in the left-hand side, the entire column needs to be filled out across the row. Yep, the row needs to be filled out completely. There we go. And if there are blank boxes or there are some examples that we'll give that would make it non-compliant. So one of the things that we like to talk about is that the needs drive the services, or the child's needs drive the services and their frequencies, not the school or program schedule, which we know that this is tricky, especially when you're talking about high school and sometimes even down to middle school. But it's really based on what they need for services, not the length of the class or the block of class. So try to be mindful of that. We know it's difficult. So like I said, when you're filling out the service grid, if you're putting something in the left-hand column, you want to make sure that all of those other pieces are filled out. That position responsible needs to be the certified special educator or licensed related service provider. They are the ones responsible for that service, and to make sure that that student is working toward meeting their goal. If you have someone else working with them, like a CODA or an SLPA, an ed tech, anything like that, they would not be listed here. They are not the position responsible. If you want to document that they're working with the student, you can put them in section 6. However, the position responsible are those certified special educators or licensed related service providers. They're the ones that are listed here. Then you have your location, which should be special ed, general ed, or a combination of both. And then your frequency, as long as your IEP team, all the members of the IEP team, including the parent, understand that frequency, that's up to you how you document that. But when you get into a crazy amount of minutes over a month or something like that, sometimes it's a little like you have to be a super mathematician to figure out how much time that is. And then your duration dates. The one little caveat here is that ESY needs to be adjusted for just those summer dates. If you have it for the duration of the IEP, then that could mean that a parent could come and be like, well, we're on February break, so we have ESY throughout the entire school year, so we would like services during February break. So that's why you need to be more specific with summer dates for ESY. And then also a note that with speech and language, the blue box at the bottom talks about speech and language. It's tricky because it's both, it can be a special ed service, but it also can be a related service. So if a student is a child with a speech and language impairment, either by itself or part of a multiple, then you would put speech and language at the top as a special ed service. Or if they're identified as a child with autism and speech and language is the only service that they're receiving, that would also be a special ed service. Any other time, it would be listed under related services. So that gets a little bit tricky. The other thing is consultation and ESY, extended school year, are both listed under special ed services at the top. However, if you are providing speech and language ESY or speech and language consult, make sure to keep them under the related services section because that's still a related service if it is a related service. In OT, same idea. So if it's a related service, all of it goes under related, and then special ed would be at the top only. It gets a little confusing because the form only says those things at the top under special ed service, but you can add those to the bottom.
Carly, before we move on to the next one, there's a question about the position responsible for transportation.
I don't know if I have a definitive answer for that. I know that I've seen like SAU, transportation department or something like that, like just
Special ed
alluding to.
director we usually see there too. Or,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something like that is appropriate. SVC4, this is a new one we started looking at this cohort, and it's a little bit tricky. We are looking at section 7, so the services the student is getting as part of their IEP, and then we're checking that against schedules, either student schedules or provider schedules. So we're just checking to make sure that the students that the IEP team has determined the student should get, that they're getting those services. So compliance would be that they are on a schedule somewhere and we can verify that they're receiving those services. And then non-compliance would be that we aren't able to verify that. So we will pretty much take any way you can show us that they're getting these services. We've asked for either provider schedules, some like high schools, it was easier to do student schedules because they can print like from Power School or Infinite Campus or whatever. We have also provided in our email that we sent out yesterday, we have this form where you can fill in information. And we only do this for the students that are part of the self-assessment. So you don't have to do it for every single student. It's just those files that you're reviewing as part of the self-assessment that we will be reviewing when we come on site. So however you can document that they're getting those services that are outlined in section 7, we are happy to take a look at that, and that's good. LRE 1 is the LRE statement on the IEP. Oh, I get to do this one this time. Come on. Okay. So the LRE statement is not it doesn't, the prompt is wrong on the IEP. Let's just say that. So when we look at the LRE statement and we are looking for compliance, we are looking for why, due to the nature and severity of the child's disability, are they not able to be in the gen ed setting with their non-disabled peers, basically. And so that's kind of what this whole highlighted and bolded section is about. So I think we have an example with Sammy. I know it skips over the percentage thing, but so here's an example. Sammy's other health impairment due to ADHD is to such a degree that he requires individual and small group instruction in the special education environment. So you're really explaining why the student needs to be in the environment that they're working in to receive their services. That's what it's about. And then LRE 3 is about the percentage. So this is kind of like, should be pretty easy, hopefully. So as long as you have a percentage in there for your LRE, you're good to go. So here it is, 73% for this kiddo. So, and we don't come in with calculators and try to figure that out. So as long as we can see it, we're good. Lena, it's good to be aware of these things. She's talking in chat about how we're so wordy. Oh my goodness.
Our
Yes,
LREs are much more wordy, and so we'll have to like pare it down.
and that's okay. We're not saying that wordy isn't okay. We're just saying it doesn't need to be.
We just want you to spend 3 days reading our LREs instead of one day.
Yeah. Okay. WRN2, this is about the written notice. So this is a new one that's coming up for you folks in the 25-26 cohort. We will be looking at the written notices, the annual written notices that accompany the IEP that we're looking at. And we'll be looking to make sure that you are documenting all of the required members are attending the meetings, and that if they are not in attendance, then they were excused. So this is from Muser around the required participants for the IEP meetings. So basically the parent, the one general ed teacher, the one special ed teacher, that representative that from the SAU that can commit funds, and then other people that the SAU or the parents feel have knowledge and need to be included. And that would include those related service providers. If you're reviewing evaluations, then it would be the individual or individuals that interpret those results of those evaluations. And then whenever appropriate, the child. And yeah, so that's it. Lena has another question. Sure.
Carly, I have multiple questions on this. So
Yeah.
at MEVA, we invite the entire team, right? So like
Yes.
if a student has 6 kids, we invite, I mean, 6 teachers, we invite them all.
Mhm.
But they don't all come. But we're
Mhm.
still meeting the criteria of, so there's somebody there, and if they didn't come, they've consulted with their colleague or they've sent us a message, you know, a progress update. So we're not getting excusals for them, right? You're not expecting excusals from teachers that we invited that didn't come if we have a process to make sure that they're ahead.
Like, so I'm assuming that you're taught, like, so they're gen ed teachers, special ed teachers. So
Yeah,
you're
all the
inviting
gen ed,
multiple-
so we invite all the gen ed teachers.
Yeah.
Obviously,
So
if
as
the
long as
education-
one
as
is
long as
there.
one shows up, we don't need to
Yep.
get excusals for those that we invited. Okay, the other
Correct.
question is, there are times our related service people, because they are contracted, can't come.
Mhm.
So they will speak to each other. So the OT might speak to the PT saying, here's my report, can you report out for me? And so
Mhm.
we're not getting an excusal for the OT because we've asked permission, but to the parent, like, your OT can't come, but she's shared the results with a PT who's qualified to review these results. Are you okay with that? We're not getting excusal. Is that still okay?
I think this is where you're going to need the excusal form because
Okay.
they would be it was someone that you deemed should be at the meeting, like you decided that they should be invited and they aren't coming. So then you would have that excusal form and the parent just needs to sign off. Instead of doing it verbally, you would just have them sign off and then the OT could still send in their written thing. And I think that kind of goes with this excusal thing on the side. So,
Okay, I was thinking that if someone was at the meeting competent to review the results, right? If the school psychologist was competent to review the results, we would need a excusal because it was being represented correctly. Like, so if both the OT and PT couldn't come, obviously we need an excusal because neither is, if the speech doesn't come, we can't, the psychologist can't interpret the speech. You know what I mean? Like, so we were always thinking that if a person present at the meeting is competent to represent that situation and has consulted in advance with that person, we weren't getting excusal. So I'm hearing that was wrong. We need to change our practices.
well, I would question, like, are they providing services or it's just a review of their evaluation?
Just reporting out. Just reporting out.
Difference there.
Yeah, just reporting out. And so they're coming to the meeting, just reporting out on their evaluation. And if that were to happen, most of the time, the therapist would have met with the parent in advance and said, I can't come to the meeting, but I'm giving you my results. At the meeting, this person's going to be presenting the data to the entire team. We were not getting excusals, so we will start to get excusals because I'm hearing something different now. I'm seeing Jennifer shaking her head. So, and since Jennifer is my person, excusal from this point on.
Do you want to elaborate on that, Jennifer? Because
I would get excusals because my brain goes to what would a hearing officer say? And everything in Muser about not attending specifies in writing. So that's where my head is.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah. And there's a question about what about CTE instructors? Do they need to attend the sending schools IEP for their students? That's a great question. I honestly do not know the answer to that. But we can keep track of that.
A CTE teacher is a gen ed teacher. No?
I think so, yeah.
So as long as you have one gen ed teacher there.
The only difference there, Jennifer, is that the CTE teacher, for us in many schools, they're a sending school, right? So they're supposed to be able to speak to the gen ed setting, and the CTE setting is kind of unique.
Different.
Yeah.
Huh. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that one.
It's a good question.
That's good.
That is a good question.
There's not another gen ed teacher present. Okay. So Jan just shared what they do in her SAU. Okay. This is going to be a learning curve for me, at least. I'm not sure about the other members on the team because, like I said, this is the first time we'll have been looking at this, so it will be a little bit of a learning experience. Okay, any other questions that haven't already come up as we've been going?
You want me to jump in, Carly? Because I was supposed to jump in a while ago.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot.
Okay. Hey.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
All right. I do not have the chat box open because I'm not in my usual place. So if you can keep an eye on the chat box.
Yes, I will keep an eye.
Thank you. All right. Couple things, trainings coming up October 15th. We have a full IEP training. It is basically what we've been talking about today, but it goes into much more depth. It's a lot of information for one training, but that the link to register for this is on the professional development schedule that went out with the email yesterday. All right, let's move to transition plans. So the thing about transition plans is it's a federal indicator. So when our report goes to the Office of Special Ed Programs on February 1st every year, one of the things we have to report is what percentage of students 16 years and older have compliant transition plans. So we look at 11 things on the transition plan. If one of those things is not compliant, that's a non-compliant transition plan. It's very frustrating that we have to report it that way. We have complained, but you know, that's the way it is. So with that, whatever you want. All right, so I'm going to go through the things we look at. So TRA1 is just checking off that box on the advanced written notice that post-secondary goals and transition services are going to be discussed. Typically at the annual is when you do this, because they need to be discussed once a year. You must invite the child to any meeting where post-secondary transition is going to be discussed. Again, that needs to happen once a year. Best practice is to put the student's name right in that salutation. I think not all of the vendors allow that, but it's perfectly compliant to just list the student on page 2 there. TRA3 is tricky. I'm going to talk about TRA3 in a way that's different than how we are going to review files this year. We found out that we were looking at IDEA wrong. So what we are doing is for 4 years, we're training to this. And when we get through everybody, because we're on a 4-year monitoring cycle, then we're going to start monitoring for it. So not this time, but next time you're in monitoring, we will be looking at this. So this is about agencies or organizations that are likely to be responsible for providing or paying for transition services. So section 9G on the transition plan. If there is an agency that's likely to be responsible for providing or paying for transition services, you must invite them to the meeting. So these are meetings where post-secondary transition is discussed, and post-secondary transition needs to be discussed once a year. So you must invite them, but you must also get parental consent. So it gets tricky. So send the parental consent form home before the advance written notice goes out. You can see in the red circle, there's a place to put date given to parent. Put that date in there, because if you don't get the form back, that's your evidence, right? We sent the form to the parent, they didn't send it back, so we don't have consent, so we did not invite the agency. If they send it back, invite the agency, put them on the advance written notice. So again, we're not monitoring for this year, but we will next time you are in cohort. So
Question for that, Jennifer.
yes.
There are times that we have a meeting and all of a sudden somebody in the Zoom is somebody we don't know, which I never let in until the parent comes. And so I say to the parent, hey, there's somebody in the waiting room by the name of Jennifer Gleason. Do you know who she is? Oh yeah, she's our voc rehab representative. So we didn't know they were coming.
Yeah.
And so they were invited by the parent. This form.
Good question. So if that happens, document that in the written notice. The parent invited this person. We didn't know they were involved, but now that we know, we are going to invite them to all meetings going forward.
Okay, and my other question is, we talk post-secondary more often than just the one time a year because we just feel it's important, but we don't always feel as though, so like we talk about the ONET or the, you know, whatever services, whatever post-secondary stuff, but it's not something that would involve the other party. We don't have to do this for every meeting that we have post-secondary on the AWN, right?
You do.
Oh, well, then we're going to stop talking post-secondary.
I know. That's why I keep saying
That's
you have
silly.
to talk about post-secondary transition once a year. It's tricky. I know.
Seems
It's
like
a
a
lot.
disservice, right? It's like a paperwork disservice because
It
it's
is.
good to talk post-secondary because that's what we're ultimately trying to do. But if it adds work to our caseload,
Right.
it seems, okay, I'll be quiet.
Right. And we met with our national TA providers a lot over these past couple of years. And this was a question we asked is, can you do this once a year and have it cover? But it has to be before each meeting. We tried. All right. PRA4 post-secondary goals are updated annually. So here we just look for a conversation in the written notice. You can put a statement like this in your written notice, or even if there's just, in section 3 where you're documenting the conversation, if there's conversation about post-secondary transition and goals, that's fine. If it's there, we will find it. So just make sure that those conversations are documented in the written notice. Transition assessments. So we highly recommend that you keep them in there from year to year and just put the year it was done. You want to keep doing different transition assessments because, as we know, kids are going to change their mind between freshman year and senior year. So just keep doing them. This link will bring you to the Transition Maine website that has a ton of free assessment tools. So it's a really good resource. So if we come in and we just see, the student's a senior and we just see informal student interview was done freshman year and nothing since, we're going to ask questions about that, about what's going on with that. So just make sure you're doing your transition assessments and documenting them. All right, post-secondary goals. The first one is for education or training after high school. Again, here you want to be specific. Here we have Bill, and Bill is trying to decide between marketing and carpentry. So we put them both in there. He's either going to go to college to study marketing or he's going to receive on-the-job training to become a carpenter. He's still working that out. Absolutely fine to put them both in there. Don't put specific colleges in there. You just put community college, 2-year college, 4-year college, on the job, whatever you're going to put in there. The other thing is if you write things like, Bill will go to college and study a field of his choice. That's fine if they're a freshman, even a sophomore, and they're still working it out. But once they get junior, senior, you want to really get more specific with the goals. Employment goal needs to align to the education goal. And same thing, be specific if you can. We'll work in the field of marketing or as a carpenter. He's still working that out. It's okay to put them both in there. Independent living, this one is optional, but we do encourage you to think about this. Typically, it's just for kids who have really significant needs that end up with an independent living goal. But I would say that most high schoolers would benefit from some kind of independent living goal. So just give it some thought. So here we have Bill will access mental health supports in his community independently or with assistance from his parents. So it's just a general, how is he going to get through?
Okay, there is a quick question in the chat about when a student states emphatically that they do not know. I think that would be maybe one of those times when it may be a field of their choice or,
And I would, at that point, keep going, like try and find different transition assessments, to find out what they're interested in. That's a good question, though. Course of study. So this is multi-year. It needs to be from current through exit. We recommend keeping the past on there as well. It needs to align to those post-secondary goals. So don't just put electives, the word electives in there, try and put specific electives. It's going to be updated every year anyway, so you could change those as they change their mind. For Bill, you could see he's taking carpentry and he's doing some independent study to learn about marketing. So this, and he has college in there, so he needs all of those classes to get into college. So this aligns with his post-secondary goals. So this one, course of study, you have to have it through exit. So going forward. And section 9F is the opposite. This is the transition services and activities provided by people in the school and in the community. These do not go forward. These are, they can be passed, but just during the life of the IEP and passed. Don't go into the future with these. Again, we recommend a bulleted list because we love bulleted lists. And it's not just services and activities that are happening through the school. It could be whatever, the whole community kind of helping this kid out. And this is about the annual goals. So if you think about high school kids, right, that whole IEP is really focused on their post-secondary transition plan. So we used to have that statement in preparation for blah, blah, blah. You don't have to have that statement in there. If you want to put it in there, absolutely you can. But if we can see that the goals are feeding those post-secondary goals, we're good, and they typically do. So that's transition plans. We are doing a deep dive October 30th at 9 o'clock. And again, on that professional development schedule, you can get registration link for that as well. And we do record all of our trainings and put them up on the website. So you can always get the recordings. Questions on transition?
One
All
just
right.
popped into the chat, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Oh, you got it. Okay.
No, I didn't. I don't have the chat open.
Oh,
Can you?
okay.
Sorry.
Yes. Yep. Student whose IEP ends next week. He'll be entering 9th grade in fall 2025. Should I add his transition this year or wait until the end of his 9th grade year?
Up to the IEP team. You could do it either way. And we do say that if the student has an IEP like in September, freshman year, you don't have to do the transition plan. It just has to be done by the end of their freshman year. So that is completely up to the IEP team when that gets done, as long as it's done by the end of freshman year.
That's it so far.
All right, I am going to move on. So when we come to visit you, if you have paper files, it's easiest to just leave the files. We'll dig through them. We are very good at looking at what we need to and not looking at anything else. If you don't have paper files and you're on only electronic files, we can make that work. It's new to us, so however you want to make that work, we are open. If you have a way to provide temporary read-only access to your vendor, we're open to that. If you want to create PDFs, we had one this year that worked out really well. They created PDFs and they put them on a Google Drive, and it was all organized in such a way that we went on site and we were able to kind of split it up. So we didn't have like more than one person looking at the same thing.
How did they give you access
really
to,
well?
how did they give you access to Google?
I'm sorry, say that again, Lena.
How did they give you access to, so my intention is to create Google Drives, for each of the students that we pick, with subfolders in there. But how would I be able to give you access to my Google Drive?
So it depends. So depends on how tight your Google is, I think, in your school. Typically, they can share it with us, and we just have to, when we go into it, it just says verify your email, and it sends us a code.
Okay,
It's rare that we can't get into a Google Drive. It happens sometimes, but not very often. We can test it ahead of time.
okay. Thank you.
If you have electronic files and you want to print, that's fine too, up to you. We only need one copy of each thing. We don't need more than that. The monitoring timeline that you got with your email yesterday lists all the things we're going to want to look at. We will also send you another list about a month before you're on site. And of course, we are always available to answer questions. Don't spin your wheels. Don't worry about things. You are too busy for that. Reach out and we will answer your questions. If you are in cohort 1 or 2 for pre-K, we're going to look at those files too. So include those on your self-assessment. If you can, if you're just starting, you might not be able to, but we will want to look at some of those files when we come on site. We are also going to look at Child Find for those pre-K kids. So we're going to want to look at new referrals as well as Part C to Part B transition. So probably 10-ish. You probably won't have that many. Whatever you have, we'll figure out how many to look at. Sometimes it's all of them because you don't have that many. But we're going to look at those. So there we go. All right. We also ask when you do your self-assessment that you do, no, sorry, wrong thing. I'm going to say it anyway. That you review one IEP from each of your out-of-unit partners. So if you send kids to Margaret Murphy, pick one, do one Margaret Murphy, that kind of thing. So that is for reviewing IEPs. For students who you have placed out of unit within the last 2 years, we are going to look at the process of placement. These are the things we'll look for. One of the things we see a lot is that you have your meeting and decide that you're going to place the student out of unit, but you don't know where yet. If that happens, once you decide where, you have to have another meeting with a representative of that placement. There has to be a meeting at some point before the kid starts that has a representative of that placement at the meeting. So that one gets missed sometimes, which is understandable. Forms, we're going to look at summary of performance. So those would be for students who are graduating right now. SLD eligibility forms, speech and language eligibility, and adverse effect forms. We look at 3 of each of those, except speech and language, we only look at 1. We will also want to look at 3, if you have them, of students who have been dismissed from services or have changed eligibility category. So if you have a student that changes from SLD to OHI, you need to complete the SLD form and the adverse effect form. So we will be checking on that. There is a training on eligibility forms that you can watch here. Child Find, we're going to look at 10 if you have them. Make sure that you are documenting that procedural safeguards are being given to the parent upon referral. So that typically is either, if you're doing a Part 1 meeting, it's with that advance written notice or with the parental consent form. There's a spot on both of those forms to put enclosures. What we're finding is that people are doing this, they're just not documenting it. And as we know, if it's not in the written notice, it didn't happen. So document that you're giving procedural safeguards upon referral. And evaluations completed and eligibility meeting held within 45 school days for K-12 or 60 calendar days for pre-K.
Jennifer, I'm just going to jump in for a second because during our morning session, we had a great question about whether we're looking at initial referrals only for kids who qualify, and we are not. So if you are considering your initial referrals, you can submit students who didn't qualify as well.
It's Ashley.
And so if we don't have 10, we should assume that all
That's
of
fine.
the ones that we have will be reviewed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You don't have to go digging up kids for us. All right. This is another federal indicator, which is for you pre-K people. We're going to be looking at Part C to Part B transition. We'll be looking at a couple things there, but the big takeaway is IEP has to be implemented by the child's 3rd birthday, in by 3, as they say. Abbreviated day, we are going to look at all of your files for students on an abbreviated day. If you don't have any students on abbreviated day, we will celebrate that. So there are 2 reasons you can put a child on an abbreviated day. It's for their individual educational reasons or their individual medical reasons. If it's educational reasons, these are the things you need to have documented in your written notice. How the student will access the gen ed curriculum and their IEP services, how they will access assessments. That one is missing a lot. We get it. It's not top of mind, but needs to be in there. When you put a child on an abbreviated day, you have to create a reentry plan of no longer than 45 calendar days. That has to be documented in the written notice, along with the actions the SAU will take to assist the child to get to a full day. If you go past those 45 calendar days and the student's not back yet, that's when you start meeting every 20 school days, review progress towards return, review progress in the educational setting, and talk about maybe they need another setting in order to progress. You want to make sure that whatever the reason is, you state that you are putting the child on an abbreviated day, which you have to put in the written notice. You have to put the reason. Make sure that that is addressed in the IEP. If it's for behavior, make sure you are addressing behavior in the IEP. Whatever the reason is, you're addressing it. It's part of the reentry plan. It's in the IEP. The other thing is the LRE percentage on the IEP is based on a full school day. So it's the amount of time the child is with gen ed peers divided by a full school day. Medical, if it's for medical reasons, it's a whole different story. You still have to document how they will access the curriculum and their IEP services, how they will access assessments. The LRE is still based on a full school day, but you only have to meet when the student is medically able to increase their school day, but at least every 90 calendar days. So a little bit different documentation requirements there. Here is a link to our abbreviated day training that goes through all of that in great detail. It does the math for LRE. There are slides that are just like one page that tell you everything you need to document in the written notice. That's handy to have. So watch that. Any questions? That was a lot of information really fast.
You just go back one slide about the ones to watch for the what should be in a written notice. Which one is that?
This is for medical.
Just for medical. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So, because OSEP, the federal government, put out new guidance in July of 2023, we had to kind of change how we were doing things because there's different time constraints we're in. So your on-site visit date is either in November, December, or in April, May. If your date is in November, December, we ask that you get your self-assessment done by October 1st. If it's in April or May, we ask that you get it done by March 1st. The self-assessment is the only thing we ask you to do ahead of time. We used to have you send a whole bunch of stuff in before your on-site visit. We don't do that anymore. The only thing you have to do is self-assessment. After our visit, that week, you will get pre-findings. We will talk a lot about this at the visit, so you don't really need to remember this. Pre-findings are things that are not systemic. You can choose to amend IEPs and fix these things within 30 days, completely optional. If you do that, that finding won't show up on your CAP. If you have any abbreviated day findings, those have to be fixed for that student within 30 days. If your visit is in November or December, your CAP will be issued January 31st, and we have moved to a 10-month timeline to get the CAP closed. So those need to be closed by November 30th. And if your visit is April, May, it will be issued June 30th and needs to be closed by April 30th. If you've been through this before, you know there are two types of evidence we need to close your CAP. Child specific, those are those things that we see when we come on site. This student, we saw this thing and this student's IEP, you need to fix it in this IEP. We used to be able to look at a sample of those. Like if you had 5 students with this finding, we only needed to see 1. But they put the kibosh on that at OSEP, so we need to see evidence of every single correction of everything that we've seen. And you'll get a nice, easy list to work off of. Beyond that, we need to see evidence that these changes are part of your system now. So we need to see subsequent systemic evidence. So these are things that are not files that were not part of the file review to show that you are systemically compliant. We will give you this email all the time, but this is a secure email. We are the only ones that have access to it. So any evidence can be sent here. Julie asks that if you send things through US mail, please do not put staples in them. It would make Julie very happy, and we very much like to keep Julie very happy. All right. I am going to run through, because we are right at the end of time. So what I'm going to do is run through our resources, and then anybody who would like to stay late to look at the new self-assessment form can absolutely do that. If you can't stay, on our website is a practice form. So you can go in and put whatever you want in there and play with it and practice, and it won't go anywhere. So these links should work on your PDF. We have the procedural manual. I get a little goodie bag at a party. Muser. We have our IEP quick reference document that Carly talked about at the beginning. We actually have one of these for each of the forms on our website. You can find those at this third one down, resources. The second one brings you to all of our recordings. The last one is where you can get forms. So those excusal forms and the parental consent to invite outside agency forms, all of those are there. We have already done our professional development schedule for 25-26. These are registration links, so have at it, join us. We do record them all if you can't come. And you get contact hour for joining us or for even watching the recording. And this is how you do that. If you fill out this feedback form for us, we love feedback. We use it. We change things up. Put in your email address and select preparing for file review from the drop down, and Carly will send you contact hours for hanging with us today. And this is how to get to DOE online, and our contact information. Really reach out anytime. Don't give yourself anxiety. Don't spin your wheels. Just ask. If you can't find something, if you're not sure about something, absolutely reach out and ask. So I'm going to end this and go through the self-assessment. Can you see the self-assessment? Do I have the screen up there?
We can. It's a little bit small, but I think they can see it.
I don't think I can make it bigger. Sorry.
I think maybe that's just for me.
Well, probably not. All right, I'm gonna look over here because it's over here now. All right, so this is a practice form. It's the 24-25 one is on the website now. The new one hopefully will be up tomorrow. It has to go through this whole DOE process to get up there. Hopefully tomorrow, definitely by Monday. The 25-26 one will be up there. And you can put whatever you want in here and it won't go anywhere. So I am just gonna type stuff in so that I can get through. Hit tab, not enter. This is where I get messed up every time. Your date has to be in this format with slashes and with a 4-digit year. And again, tab, don't enter. I don't know how old that kid is, but you can also click here to find dates, fill it in that way. There's just a lot of basic information. If a student attends a school outside of your SAU, if you switch into another district or you use a 60-40 school, they're in an SPPS or regional program, put that in here. You can put case manager in or not, up to you. You're going to select their identification, section 2 of the IEP. If you select multiple, it will ask you why that's multiple. So you can just put whatever you want in there. And then we start the things that we just went through. So is the team meeting at least annually? Yes or no? Was the IEP sent within 21 school days? And you can see, just like in the slides, it tells you what constitutes yes, what constitutes no. If you select no on anything, it will ask you why. So you can put notes in there. When you finish your self-assessment, let us know that you're done and we will send you a summary. It will have each student and what you put in for them. So these notes that you put in will be on that summary. So make the notes something that's meaningful to you. I'm going to go through, I'm going to just blow through a few of these, but you can see, because I want to get to goals.
Jennifer, I just want to make the note too, that once you guys have submitted, you're going to want to keep track of who you're inputting into the self-assessment, because once it's submitted, you kind of lose access to that. We can always access them for you, but oftentimes people get pulled in 1,000 directions and forget who they've input into the self-assessment, or if they were halfway through, or just can't remember who they put in on one day. So just keep a list for yourself. We tried to fix that this year, but Microsoft Forms was not cooperating with us. So just keep a list of who you're putting in there.
Thanks, Ashley. And if you do get messed up with that, we can send you that summary at any time. It doesn't end your ability to put more in. So as Ashley talked about, academic goals, when you're looking at academic goals, you're looking at all of them. So you can see the question, yes, all academic goals are measurable and enable progress toward, so when you're doing this, right, you're looking at all of the academic goals. So they're all measurable, let's say, except one. So maybe, because you're going to get this, maybe you say something like goal 2 measurement was a specific curriculum, so that you know which goal you were looking at. Citation, so this is, again, all of the goals. Each goal has a citation. If one or more is not cited, it's no. Alignment, each goal is aligned to section 7. I want to get into functional. All right, so functional. The first question is, what's the service provider, right? So if there are no functional, you just click NA. Let's look at the special education teacher, right? So we are going to look at all of this service provider's goals for this student include measurement data. So we're looking at the special education teacher's functional goals as a whole, and we're going to do that through each provider. So that is the basics. Go visit. Sorry, I'm trying to multitask. Use the practice one and put whatever you want in there. And if any questions come up, let us know.